tracking down suspects of the Paris attacks after gunfire and explosions in Saint-Denis. What do the French police raids tell us about intelligence failures in Europe? And what do we know about the communities where the suspects were holed up? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Paris is very much a city on edge following the coordinated attacks which killed 124 people and wounded hundreds more last Friday night. Early on Wednesday morning, residents of the Saint-Denis suburb of Paris woke up to the sounds of more gunfire and explosions as police raided homes searching for suspects, targeting, amongst others, the alleged architect of Friday's attacks, Abdelhamid Aboued. The French government says it has intelligence he was in Paris, despite earlier saying he was in Syria. We'll discuss that and the latest developments after this report from Andrew Simmons, who's in Paris.
Once again, gunfire and later on explosions in Paris. Saint-Denis, a residential suburb, looks and sounds like a war zone. It's a raid by security forces under the cover of darkness, and they met fierce resistance. For more than 3 hours, the gunfire continued.
Since 4 o'clock this morning, French Special Forces police have carried out an operation to neutralize terrorists. 7 people were arrested, 2 people have died.
Police say one of the dead suspects was a woman wearing a suicide vest who blew herself up. For hours now, this Paris suburb has been in deep shock. When gunfire and explosions rattled windows, waking people up in the early hours, everyone had thought this was another attack. But no, it was a prolonged firefight between a heavily armed group holed up in an apartment down at the bottom of this street and the police. The police operation is believed to have been in search of one of the main suspects, Abdelhamid Aboued. He's Belgian of Moroccan origin, and he's believed to be in his late 20s. French authorities have maintained that he's likely to have been responsible for organising the attacks, and initially they said he was in Syria. It's known he had travelled there to fight alongside ISIL. As the operation carried on, this man spoke of how his apartment had been taken over.
I found out that it's at my house and that the people are holed up at my flat. I didn't know they were terrorists. Someone asked me a favour, and I did them a favour. Someone asked me to put 2 people up for 3 days, and I did them a favour. It's normal. I don't know where they came from. I don't know anything. If I'd known, do you think I'd have done it?
Not surprisingly, people in this district were frightened and confused.
So I opened the windows and I saw a policeman who was running in the street behind people and shouting, "Don't move, don't move, close the windows." We shut the windows, we stayed home, but every 15 minutes we could hear loud booms. We heard them 3, 4, 5 times.
Police say arrests have been made of suspects from the apartment and a building nearby. This may have been a breakthrough, but questions persist about the quality of intelligence in the run-up to last week's attacks. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera, Saint-Denis in Paris.
All right, let's bring in our first 2 guests for today's discussion and analysis. Martin Reardon is with me here in the studio. He's the Senior Vice President of the Soufan Group, a New York-based security and intelligence consultancy. Welcome, Martin. And in Paris, Julien Théron is a political scientist and analyst at the University of Versailles. And Paris, welcome to you too. Julien, I'd like to start with you. The man who planned these attacks, Aboued, he was well known to authorities. He's been on the run since January, known to be moving about. How was it that he was missed, do you think, until apparently today?
Well, he was well known from the Belgian security services, and that was troubling that France indeed could not get him, and it means that we have to reinforce the security services cooperation in Europe.
So, but what was it about the intelligence that we've seen today that's led to enable the raids that have taken place on this cell where apparently he is or has been?
Well, it was kind of a safe house, actually, where he stayed 2 kilometers only from the Stade de France, meaning that it was probably planned that they would hide over there. But we know that with this kind of movement, when they hide, it usually ends like it ended for the Charlie Hebdo attack and like it ended here, meaning with actually some violent actions, because they are really interested in making the biggest number of deaths. So it means that everything was kind of planned to meet there. The security forces were first interested in an address that has been found in a mobile phone, found in a trash can near the Bataclan, which was in Alfortville, actually, in the suburb of Paris as well. But finally, it's over there in Saint-Denis that they found the man.
I might have read, and it's pretty clear there's been a fairly catastrophic intelligence failure here. What was the difference between before, when they didn't know where this guy was, and suddenly that they knew where he was?
I think this is indicative of what you're seeing with the intelligence community overall worldwide now. The threat number of terrorists far exceeds the capability of most countries' counterterrorism officials. So what you have is intelligence is getting to be less and less preventive or preventative, and more reactive or investigative after the fact. And that's what most intelligence security services are really best at right now. Gathering the evidence afterwards, whether it's exploitation of telephones, in this case I think that's what it was, emails, interviews, interrogations, and just good, solid police work. Okay. And that's what leads into this.
Okay. Apparently there were warnings of an impending attack from Turkey and from Iraq.
There was, but this is the problem with when you're talking about international intelligence sharing. Threats can be given, but unless it's credible and actionable information or intelligence, there's not a lot that can be done. Credible in the sense is it's second source, or it's just somebody said this, or it was something that was seen online. And then actionable. Do you know what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and approximately when? Otherwise, every single day, intelligence services in all the countries would be getting this report, and there's nothing they can do.
Yeah, but this guy was well known, and he was on the loose, wasn't he?
He was. Intelligence and information now is that he had gone to Syria at least for a few years, came on back. And again, that's the problem with many countries. They're overwhelmed with the counterterrorism work that they have to do. France in particular. France has approximately 1,500, 1,600 of its citizens or residents who have gone to Syria or Iraq in the last 4 years. Many of them have returned. Some have gone and come back, and the officials don't even know that.
This is a thing, isn't it, Julien, as Martin says, that the kind of pool of ISIL supporters within France, within Europe, has grown beyond the surveillance capacity, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. We think that there's more or less 10,000 people in France who are under survey with what we call an S file, meaning for civilians. And inside these 10,000, there's something like a little bit more than half of it for rather dangerous activities linked with radical Islam, or linked to a terror cell for logistics and so on. So it means that it's a lot of people. We consider then that we need something like 7 civil officers, intelligence officers, to maintain the civilians of 1 inside the country, and dozens of them to maintain the civilians of them outside the country. It means that if you multiply 5,000 by these figures, it means we would need 100,000 intelligence officers to maintain a proper surveillance of these people. And of course, the state can't afford this kind of element. So what we probably have to work on is the EU, like I said, EU intelligence sharing, not only EU, but with other partners like the US, but also with Turkey. Mostify is the brain of the operation, not like Amimur, the Belgian one I was speaking about. So Mostify was actually said 2 times by Turkey to be on their territory, and they lost track. And Ankara said to Paris that we lost track of him, and we did not have any kind of signs that he was back in Europe and in France. So we thought actually until 2 days ago that he was still in Syria. So you see that there's a kind of security breach, and we have to find out how is it possible to have this kind of security breach.
So, Martin Reardon, perhaps Europe needs a kind of sweeping surveillance powers that you see in the United States.
Well, the United States has had that sweeping surveillance power is under a lot more control than it was up until a year ago. This is the problem when you talk about sweeping intelligence or surveillance. You have to balance what the threat is and the public's interest, or the right, not the interest, but the public's right to privacy.
We could argue that the threat is greater in Europe than it is in the United States, couldn't you?
It is.
In terms of dealing with the numbers.
One, I think the number of returning foreign fighters or foreign fighters that have at least gone there, and also you can drive from London all the way to Turkey and then cross into Syria and Iraq. You can't do that from North America. But the idea of increasing the surveillance, I think the world has seen this in the last year. There's a big issue about privacy concerns. So you have to have that delicate balance. It has to be a court that is deciding what can and can't be intercepted and when it can be intercepted, not the intelligence services.
But when you see attacks like these and the kind of reaction that we're getting from the leaders, certainly from President Hollande, which is, you know, he's suggesting that we need emergency powers for another 3 months and so forth, you know, that's perhaps the reaction that ISIL are looking for.
It is. ISIL, any terrorist organization with an attack, they're looking for a reaction, and they want whoever the country or the people attack, they want them to overreact, because that plays right into the terrorist message. So this has to be looked at, or it has to be considered.
Okay, and Julien, so talking of President Hollande, he's talking about the ease with which, as Martin's just alluded to there, people are crossing borders, and he wants to bring in stricter border controls. Do you think that's a sensible way forward, a prudent way forward?
It is actually indeed a very sensible matter, because you know that we already have a debate about the borders, internal Schengen area, EU Schengen area borders, regarding to the refugee crisis. And some countries even build some fences, like barbed wire fences, to control the flow of migrants. So we already had this questioning since months regarding to refugees, and now it asks the question of the borders of Europe, but meaning the border of outside Europe with a specialized agency called Frontex, and the control of the borders perhaps inside Europe as well. And of course it goes on with a political debate, because you know that the far right is on the rise in Europe, and even the conservatives in a lot of countries say that we should put again borders between the countries inside the EU Schengen area, which ask a lot of questions. But at least a former internal intelligence head said that we have a trouble to control at least the Schengen, outside Schengen area borders. So that's tough questions that should be discussed at the European level, of course.
Right. Well, gents, it's been great to get your points of view for this part of the show. Julien Theron, thank you very much indeed, and Martin Reardon here in the studio. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. So we're going to move things on now. Let's bring in Yasser Louati in Paris. He is the spokesman for the Collective Against Islamophobia in France and a human rights activist. And joining us via Skype from York in the United Kingdom is Zahid Amanullah, a senior program manager at the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. Gentlemen, great to see you there. Thanks very much indeed to talk about this important subject. There is a strong Belgian connection here. Clearly, what do we know, first of all, Zahid, about the communities that these people came from?
Well, the community of Molenbeek is not unlike a number of communities in Europe that have been the focus of a lot of attention after terrorist attacks, such as Bradford in the UK, East London, Saint-Denis in Paris. And I know I've just been speaking with a number of people in the community in Molenbeek about what life is like there, and they're saying it's become very difficult, and they're sort of caught between the criminality and the jihadism that has come out from within their communities, and the backlash that's happening against them. And they're very concerned about that. Right,
so this community is comparable to those other communities around Europe that we see that seem to breed, if you like, these recruits for ISIL.
Well, I mean, they're very, and rightfully so, defensive a little bit about that because, by and large, these communities although they may be deprived, there's a lot of hardworking people there. We know that the people who are falling into these extremist movements are a very, very small minority of the people there. And they're trying very hard. I just spoke to a woman there whose son joined ISIL and was killed there, and she's very despondent about that. And she's joined a group of other mothers who are in the same situation, and one of their sons was killed in the Paris attacks. So you can see they're caught on both sides. And I wanted to reference a point that Martin made about intelligence being less preventative. This is the part that's missing here. We see the stories of these young people who are caught up in these movements, and we see them coming from often very secular lives to becoming radicalized and participating in these terrorist acts. What happens in the middle, we're not really focusing on. The common thread, of course, is the recruitment that happens from ISIL. And this is the part where preventative action is needed. And this is the part actually where we need civil society. We need voices like those mothers of sons who've gone. Their stories are very powerful, but we're not empowering them to tell them.
Well, we'll talk about preventative action in a little bit. Yasser, if I can come to you. There is no one prescription, is there, for what kind of community enables somebody to think that they should go and join ISIL's ranks? Because, for one, Aboud's background is not of the category that you would think that he would be. He wasn't impoverished, he had a good education and so forth.
I mean, right now, the common traits among all of the suspects, either during these attacks and the ones carried out in January, even prior to that, is that they all share a criminal background. And unfortunately, the government has been dealing with deep social issues with only security measures, and definitely falling into the trap of these jihadi recruiters.
So what do you mean by that? Are you suggesting that it's more? Is the fact that they come from a criminal background is why they are encouraged, why they're keen to get involved in actions for ISIL rather than some kind of religious zeal?
Sir, I will quote to you, every single research, that we carried out on the subject, and even anti-terrorism judges. They all say that religion plays no part in these actions. It's the hatred of society and seeking payback for myself of humiliation and to a sense of revenge for failing to integrate into these societies. Look at every single, the Kouachi brothers and the ones being, called suspects right now, they all share the same traits again. And unfortunately, is that we are not dealing with the issue properly.
But Abdul Hamid Aboud, he wasn't marginalized. He had a pretty, privileged upbringing.
Who said that?
Well, I mean, the education that he had, his parents were relatively well off.
Yeah, but was he integrated, or was he a part of this country, or the country he attacked? I mean, the problem, right, is that when you keep raising the base on the identity of minorities and constantly questioning their adherence, or that if they are really full-fledged citizens of their countries, and if you keep casting them aside from an early age, developing in them a sense of humiliation. I am not explaining nor justifying anything whatsoever that carried out these attacks, but there is a pattern we keep seeing over and over again. And unless the government takes concrete measures to actually shut down the stream of youngsters joining these groups, unfortunately it may happen again. And I thought so. Unfortunately, and I am so sad to have been right. Even after the January attacks, I said the government is failing to address the issue, and I'm afraid this might happen again.
Zahid, is that something you concur with?
I concur a lot with what's been said. I mean, first of all, when we always talk about radicalization, we're always trying to look for the silver bullet. I mean, there's a basket of factors that takes effect on individuals, and we've seen people convert to Islam, a radical form of Islam, who, where their ethnic background is not an issue. We've educated people. The common threads: alienation, as was mentioned, a hatred of society, a desire for meaning, and the people find it in this path. So we have to be careful about how we phrase this. And part of the reason we want to do that is we want to make sure we don't alienate people who could be helping in this battle. I mean, he's right about governments, not really addressing this issue. In many cases, they don't really have the capacity to deal with this preventative work. And that's why what governments need to do is really let civil society lead on the preventative work and really make sure that civil society has the networking and the resources to actually do this more effectively.
Okay, and then what physically, what is the preventative work that you do on the ground? Briefly.
Well, we work with local communities on counter messaging, making sure that they're connected with the private sector, with the social media companies. We make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle in terms of putting up a united front to counter ISIL propaganda, all those pieces fit, and everyone has the resources they need to produce the kind of messaging that pushes back.
Okay, Yasser, in France there is a parliamentarian called Nathalie Goulet, who's a lawmaker who chaired a commission of inquiry into so-called jihadist networks, and she voiced anger at this continued presence in France of foreign fundamentalists, as she put them, Sunni preachers who act as recruiters, beyond what's happening on the ground at grassroots to try and prevent this kind of radicalization. Is that the sort of action that should be taken to stop the spread of kind of incendiary words?
Unfortunately, this is the exact problem we faced in the 90s. Empty rhetoric, empty arguments. We are waging the right war, but we are not waging it to win it. This war against terrorism is being waged to gain public opinion. That's it. We keep repeating the same mistakes as in the 90s. We did not give enough means for the Muslim communities to organize itself, and we keep the inflow of foreign imams to teach in our mosques. And unfortunately, our mosques are not doing their jobs, not out of lack of will from the Muslims themselves, but because they are either controlled by foreign consulates, and I wouldn't nominate them, I'm pretty sure they know who they are, and at the same time we have imams who know nothing about French society. And when Muslims come forward and say, let us manage our affairs, let us educate our youth the proper way, because the French context is very specific. Unfortunately, and I can cite to you an example, for example, in the city of Athis-Mons, in the south of France, I spoke myself to the mayor, and back then there was a project to raise a mosque. And I told the mayor, I was like, Madam, we need to have a mosque funded by the local community and managed by the local community. And she dismissed our argument and said, well, I would rather have the mosque to be managed by the consulate of a foreign country so I can be invited for free over there. This is the kind of corruption we have when it comes to community work. And unfortunately, the ones paying the price is a wider Muslim minority. Add to it the failure of our schools here in France. We have over 160,000 children or youngsters who leave our schooling system without skills or degrees. Add to it the fact that these populations live in confined areas with no proper access to jobs, widespread discrimination in schools, widespread discriminations in employment. So they are cast aside from an early age. Add to it all the laws passed to specifically target the Muslim minority. The law against hijab, the law against the full face veil, these different ministerial circulars targeting hijabi women. They can't go to schools.
Okay.
They can't go to...
Listen, we're running out of time.
Children.
I'm
they
sorry,
yeah,
so we're running out of time. I just wanted to
etc.
send the last word to Zahid. Apologies for interrupting, but we've just got about a minute to go. Zahid, is anything that you're hearing from Francois Hollande and other world leaders right now, subsequent to the attacks on Friday, do you think is going to ultimately help the source of this problem?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of anger, and I know that politicians have to channel that anger. But I think I've been hearing some good words from President Obama on not overreacting, not excluding refugees based on their religion and so forth. And we need more of that kind of rhetoric right now to make sure that people are practical and reasonable in their response. I agree with a lot with what my colleague has said. We need to make sure that we don't exacerbate the problem. In fact, we make sure we don't do what ISIL wants, which is for our societies to be divided and at war with each other. That's exactly what they want. We shouldn't give it to them.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Zahid Amanullah, we appreciate that. And Yasser Louati, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting discussion. Thank you. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programmes page of our website, aljazeera.com, and you can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or indeed tweet us at AJ Inside Story. Thanks for watching. From me, Nick Clark, and all the team here, it's goodbye for now.